4th down, 6 yards to go. National championship on the line. The roar of 110,000 fans in the Rose Bowl crashes over Eli Barnes like a tsunami as he crouches behind center. His hands trembling against the leather of the football, the bright California sun beats down on his shoulders, but inside his chest, his heart pounds with the rhythm of a war drum. 3 months ago, he was the forgotten kid holding a clipboard on the sideline. The last pick who coaches barely remembered existed. Now, with 37 seconds left and his team down by 3, the weight of every prayer his small-town Alabama church ever whispered for him rests in his throwing arm. Time slows to a crawl as Eli scans the defense. Memories flooding back like a broken dam. He sees his daddy's calloused hands teaching him to throw behind their single-wide trailer. His mama working double shifts at the diner to pay for his cleats, and Coach Patterson's weathered face when he told him he'd made the team as a walk-on. The crowd noise fades to a whisper, and suddenly, he's that scared kid from Millerville again. Population 2,847, where Friday night football was the only thing that mattered. But something's different now. The fear that once paralyzed him has transformed into something else entirely. The center snaps the ball, and Eli drops back, his eyes finding the one receiver who believes in him as much as he's learned to believe in himself. This is more than a game now. It's the culmination of every rejection, every doubt, every moment when the world told him he wasn't good enough. As he releases the ball into the California sky, Eli Barnes is no longer the last pick. He's exactly where God always intended him to be. Hello my friends, before we continue our story, leave your like, share the story, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you. Millerville, Alabama sits in the heart of cotton country, where the high school football stadium holds more people than the entire downtown on a busy Saturday. The water tower painted with the Wildcats logo looms over Main Street like a sentinel, watching over a community where boys are measured by their 40-yard dash times and girls by their ability to cheer them on. Eli Barnes grew up in the shadow of that tower, in a double-wide trailer that his daddy bought used from a lot in Montgomery. Dreaming of the day he'd wear the purple and gold under those Friday night lights. The Barnes family wasn't poor by Millerville standards, but they weren't rich either. Daddy worked construction when his back allowed it, and Mama pulled double shifts at Mabel's diner. Her feet swollen from standing all day, but her smile never wavering when she'd ruffle Eli's hair after school. Their trailer sat on a heart faker, behind the Piggly Wiggly, with a beat-up tire hanging from the old oak tree and a makeshift passing target. Daddy had painted on the side of their storage shed. Every evening after homework, Eli would stand in that patchy grass, throwing spiral after spiral until Mama called him in for supper. "You got the arm, son?" Daddy would say, nursing a beer on the concrete steps while watching Eli practice. "Question is, you got the heart?" It was a fair question for a kid who'd rather read than fight, who'd sooner help old Mrs. Henderson with her groceries than join the other boys in picking on the smaller kids at school. Eli had always been different, thoughtful where others were brash, quiet where others were loud. His Sunday school teacher, Miss Ruby, used to say he had an old soul. But in a town where football was religion, having an old soul didn't mean much if you couldn't throw a touchdown pass when it mattered. The local sports culture in Millerville revolved around the Wildcats like planets around the sun. Coach Thompson had been there for 32 years, and his picture hung in the barbershop next to Bear Bryant's and Nick Saban's. The whole town shut down on Friday nights, and even the Methodist and Baptist churches moved their evening services to accommodate the game schedule. When Eli was 12, he'd sneak into the stadium early to watch the team warm up, studying the quarterback's footwork and memorizing the way he held the ball. He'd imagine himself out there, leading the huddle, making the throws that would make his daddy proud and his mama cry happy tears. But high school football in Millerville was serious business, and Eli Barnes was serious about it in a way that made other kids uncomfortable. While they were sneaking beers behind the Dairy Queen, he was watching game film. While they were chasing girls at the swimming hole, he was running routes with imaginary receivers. His junior year, he finally got his shot as the backup quarterback. And for 6 glorious games, he showed flashes of the magic that had been building in that backyard for years. The local paper even ran a story about him, calling him the quiet storm brewing in Millerville. Everything changed on a rainy October night during his senior season. The starting quarterback went down with a torn ACL, and suddenly, Eli Barnes was thrust into the spotlight he'd been preparing for his entire life. The pressure was immense, not just from the team, but from the whole town. Mr. Johnson closed the hardware store early so he could make the games, and Miss Ruby organized prayer circles specifically for Eli's throwing arm. But instead of rising to the occasion, Eli crumbled under the weight of expectations. 3 straight losses, 5 interceptions. And suddenly the town's golden boy was just another kid who couldn't deliver when it mattered most. The loss that ended their playoff hopes was the worst. Fourth quarter, tied game, perfect conditions, and Eli threw a pass that was picked off and returned for a touchdown. The silence in the stadium was deafening, broken only by the sound of his daddy's work boots on the aluminum bleachers as he walked out before the game even ended. That night, lying in his narrow bed in the trailer, Eli made a decision that would change everything. He was going to walk on at the University of Alabama, no matter what it took. He'd prove to everyone, including himself, that the kid from Millerville wasn't finished yet. The University of Alabama campus in Tuscaloosa felt like a different planet to Eli Barnes. Walking past the towering columns of the library and the perfectly manicured lawns, he clutched his duffel bag tighter, acutely aware of his second-hand cleats and the way his drawl sounded thicker around all these city kids. The football facility was a temple to the sport, with its gleaming weight rooms and indoor practice fields, making the Millerville High School gym look like a storage shed. When he approached the walk-on coordinator's office, his hands were shaking worse than they had during that final high school game. "Son, you sure about this?" asked Coach Patterson, a weathered man who'd been coaching longer than Eli had been. Alive, he looked over Eli's thin frame and unimpressive stats with the expression of someone who'd seen 1,000 hopeful kids come through that door. "We got scholarship quarterbacks who can't make the team, and you're telling me you want to walk on with no guarantee of anything?" But something in Eli's eyes made the old coach pause. Maybe it was the quiet determination. Or maybe it was the way the kid's voice never wavered when he talked about his dream. "All right, Barnes, you can try out, but I'm telling you now, this ain't high school ball." The financial reality of his decision hit home when Eli called his parents that first night. Mama's voice cracked when she told him they'd taken out a loan against the trailer to help pay for his first semester's tuition. "You don't have to do this, baby," she whispered into the phone. "You can come home, maybe get a job at the plant with your daddy." But Eli could hear the hope underneath her worry. The same hope that had driven her to work those double shifts all those years. "I'm gonna make it, Mama," he promised. "I'm gonna make you proud." The weight of that promise settled on his shoulders like a lead blanket. The cultural divide between Eli and his teammates was stark. While he was carefully budgeting every dollar and eating ramen noodles for dinner, the scholarship players were living in luxury apartments and driving cars that cost more than his family's trailer. During team meetings, he'd sit in the back, invisible among the 5-star recruits and former high school All-Americans. The other walk-ons were mostly in-state kids like him, but even they seemed to have more connections, more polish, more of whatever it took to belong in this world. Eli's accent marked him as different, his second-hand equipment marked him as poor, and his quiet nature marked him as forgettable. But he found an unexpected ally in Coach Martinez, the quarterback's coach, who'd grown up in similar circumstances in rural Texas. "Kid, you remind me of myself at your age," he said after watching Eli stay late to work on his footwork. "You got something most of these prima donnas don't hunger. Question is, what are you going to do with it?" Under Martinez's guidance, Eli began to understand that his small-town background wasn't a liability but a strength. He'd been taught to work for everything, to appreciate every opportunity, to never take anything for granted. Those lessons would serve him well in the brutal world of college. Football. The first taste of success came during a scrimmage in late spring. The third-string quarterback had gotten hurt, and Coach Patterson needed someone to run the scout team. Eli knew every play by heart from watching film, and when he stepped into the huddle, something clicked. His passes were crisp, his reads were quick, and for the first time since arriving in Tuscaloosa, he felt like he belonged. The defensive backs started chirping at him, which was actually a sign of respect. They only talked trash to players they considered threats. After the scrimmage, one of the senior linebackers, a massive kid from Birmingham, walked up to him and said, "Where'd you come from, country boy?" The growing pressure came from an unexpected source, home. Word had gotten back to Millerville that Eli had made an impression during spring practice, and suddenly, everyone wanted to know when he'd be starting. The local paper ran a story about him, and people at Mabel's Diner started asking Mama about her boy at Alabama. "He's going to be something special," they'd say, and Mama would smile and nod. But Eli could hear the worry in her voice during their weekly calls. The town was counting on him to be their representative in the big leagues, and the weight of those expectations was almost as heavy as his own dreams. The decision point came at the end of fall camp, when Coach Patterson called him into his office. "Barnes, you've exceeded every expectation we had for you," he said, leaning back in his chair. "You're going to make the team as our fourth-string quarterback. It's not glamorous, and you might not see the field for 3 years, but you'll be part of something special here." Eli felt his heart hammering in his chest as he looked around the office at the championship photos and the quotes about perseverance painted on the walls. This was it. His chance to prove that a kid from Millerville could compete with anyone. "Coach," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion churning inside him, "I'll take it." The reality of being a fourth-string quarterback at Alabama was like being a ghost in your own life. Eli spent most practices running the scout team, impersonating opposing quarterbacks for the defense to practice against, while the scholarship players got individual attention and customized training regimens. He was left to figure things out on his own, studying film until his eyes burned and staying after practice to work on his mechanics with whoever was willing to help. His typical day started at 5 a.m. with conditioning, followed by classes, then afternoon practice, then more film study until the trainers kicked him out of the facility at midnight. The academic pressure was unlike anything Eli had experienced. In high school, at Millerville, he'd been one of the smartest kids in his class, but at Alabama, he was surrounded by students who'd attended elite prep schools and had tutors since middle school. His sports management classes were full of future agents and athletic directors, kids who spoke confidently about contracts and marketing deals, while Eli still felt lucky just to be there. He spent countless hours in the library, working twice as hard as everyone else, just to maintain the GPA required to stay on the team. Some nights, he'd fall asleep over his textbooks, drooling on pages about sports psychology and business ethics. The social challenges were even more daunting. While his teammates were pledging fraternities and dating sorority girls, Eli was working a part-time job at the campus bookstore to help pay for his meal plan. He'd watch from across the dining hall as the scholarship players laughed and joked. Together, their easy camaraderie, a reminder of everything he wasn't. His roommate, a walk-on from Mobile who'd been cut after 2 weeks, had already transferred to Troy State. "This place ain't for people like us," he'd said on his way out, and Eli had to fight the urge to pack his bags and follow him home. The physical demands were relentless. Eli's body, which had been impressive by high school standards, was rail-thin compared to the Division I athletes surrounding him. The strength coach, a former NFL player who spoke exclusively in grunts and profanity, seemed to take special pleasure in pushing the walk-ons to their breaking point. "You think you're tough, Barnes?" he'd yell as Eli struggled through another set of squats. "Your daddy's construction crew could probably bench more than you." The insults stung, but they also motivated him. Every morning, he'd wake up sore and exhausted, but he'd drag himself to the weight room anyway, adding 5 pounds to his bench press, shaving 1/10 of a second off his 40 time. The competition for playing time was fierce and often personal. The second-string quarterback, a five-star recruit from Atlanta, took every opportunity to remind Eli of his place in the pecking order. "Hey, walk-on," he'd say loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Make sure you get my jersey clean for Saturday's game." The starting quarterback, a junior from California who was already being mentioned in Heisman Trophy conversations, barely acknowledged Eli's existence. During position meetings, Eli would sit in the back, taking notes on plays he'd probably never run, watching as the coaches focused their attention on the players who mattered. Everything came to a head during a brutal practice in early October. The team was struggling, having lost 2 games they should have won, and tensions were high. During a passing drill, Eli overthrew a receiver, and the ball sailed into the stands. The head coach, a legendary figure who'd won 3 national championships, stopped practice and walked over to him. "Barnes," he screamed, his face red with frustration. "If you can't make that throw, maybe you should consider intramural flag football." The entire team fell silent, and Eli felt every eye on him as he stood there, his face burning with embarrassment. That night, he called his parents, ready to quit. Ready to come home and forget this impossible dream. But something his daddy said changed everything. "Son, you remember what I taught you about building a foundation?" his father asked, his voice tired from a long day of work. "You don't start with the pretty stuff, you start with the stuff nobody sees. The concrete, the rebar, the things that hold everything else up. That's what you're doing right now, building a foundation." Eli thought about those words as he hung up the phone, and for the first time in months, he felt something other than despair. He was building a foundation, one practice at a time, one snap at a time, one day at a time. The rock-bottom moment came during the team's 6th game of the season. Eli was standing on the sideline, watching the starting quarterback struggle against a tough defense, when he heard his name called. Not to go into the game, but to fetch water bottles for the other players. As he jogged toward the equipment manager, he caught sight of himself on the stadium's video board, a skinny kid in a clean uniform, invisible among the stars. In that moment, he realized he had a choice. He could let this break him, or he could use it to build something stronger. Looking up at the crowd of 101,000 people, he made his decision. He wasn't going to be invisible anymore. The revelation came during a Tuesday practice in November when the unthinkable happened. The starting quarterback went down with a separated shoulder, and suddenly, the depth chart that had seemed carved in stone was thrown into chaos. The second-string quarterback, the cocky kid from Atlanta, was next in line. But during his first series of plays, he threw 2 interceptions and fumbled a snap. Coach Patterson was furious, screaming at the offense to wake up and play football like you know how. That's when Eli felt a tap on his shoulder. "Barnes," said Coach Martinez, his voice barely audible over the wind, "you're up." Walking into that huddle was like stepping into a different world. These weren't the scout team players he'd been throwing to 4 months. These were the stars, the scholarship athletes, the guys who'd been ignoring him since the day he arrived. The center, a mountain of a man from Mississippi, looked at him with surprise. "You know the plays, walk-on?" he asked, not unkindly, but with genuine curiosity. Eli nodded, his throat too dry to speak. He'd been studying the playbook for over a year, memorizing every formation, every route, every audible. "All right then," the center said, clapping his hands together. "Let's see what you got." The first play was a simple out route, something Eli had run 1,000 times in his backyard with imaginary receivers. But this time, when he released the ball, it was caught by a future NFL wide receiver who nodded at him with what might have been respect. The second play was a deeper crossing route, and Eli's pass was perfectly placed, hitting the receiver in stride. By the third play, the huddle had changed. The players were looking at him differently, listening when he called the plays, responding to his quiet confidence. "This kid can ball," he heard someone whisper. And for the first time in months, Eli smiled. The breakthrough moment came when Coach Patterson called for a play-action pass. The kind of higher-risk, higher-reward call that required perfect timing and trust between quarterback and receiver. Eli took the snap, faked the handoff, and rolled to his right. buying time as the defense bit on the run, fake. The pocket collapsed around him, but he kept his eyes downfield, finding his receiver breaking open across the middle. The pass was perfect, a 40-yard spiral that dropped into the receiver's hands like it had been gift-trapped. The sideline erupted, and even the usually stoic head coach allowed himself a small smile. That practice changed everything. Suddenly, Eli wasn't the invisible walk-on anymore. He was the guy who might be able to save their season. The scholarship players started including him in their conversations, asking his opinion on plays and routes. The coaches began working with him individually, fine-tuning his mechanics, and teaching him the nuances of reading defenses. Even the strength coach, who'd been riding him for months, started calling him by his first name instead of just walk-on. The transformation was so complete that Eli sometimes felt like he was living someone else's life. The community support came from an unexpected source. Word had gotten back to Millerville about Eli's sudden rise in the depth chart, and the town was buzzing with excitement. Mabel's Diner started serving Eli Barnes burgers, and the local radio station did a segment about their hometown hero. His parents drove down for the next game, his mama wearing an Alabama jersey with his number on it. His daddy's chest puffed out with pride. "That's my boy," he kept telling anyone who would listen. "That's my boy out there." The support meant everything to Eli, reminding him that he wasn't just playing for himself anymore, he was playing for everyone who'd ever been told they weren't good enough. The preparation for his first real opportunity was intense. The team's next game was against their biggest rival, a matchup that would determine their conference championship hopes. The starting quarterback was still injured, and the coaches had made it clear that Eli would be getting significant playing time. He spent every free moment studying film, learning the tendencies of opposing defenders, working with the receivers on timing routes. His confidence had grown, but so had his understanding of what was at stake. This wasn't just about proving himself anymore, it was about proving that heart and preparation could overcome talent and pedigree. The night before the game, Eli couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the journey that had brought him here, from that backyard in Millerville to this moment. He thought about his daddy's calloused hands teaching him to throw, his mama's sacrifices to pay for his equipment, Coach Martinez's belief in him when no one else would give him a chance. He thought about all the players who'd been cut, all the dreams that had been crushed, all the reasons why he should have failed. But he was still here, still fighting, still believing. Tomorrow, he'd find out if that was enough. The Rose Bowl in Pasadena was a cathedral of college football, its historic arches and manicured field representing everything Eli Barnes had dreamed about since he was a kid throwing footballs in his backyard. The college football playoff semifinal was the biggest stage in the sport, and as Eli stood on the sideline during warm-ups, he could feel the weight of 110,000 eyes upon him. The starting quarterback had been cleared to play, but his shoulder was still weak, and everyone knew that if the game got tough, Eli would be called upon to save their season. The California sun was brilliant overhead, but there was a cool breeze that reminded him of autumn afternoons in Alabama. The game started as a defensive battle, both teams feeling each other out like boxers in the early rounds. Alabama's offense sputtered, managing only a field goal in the first quarter, despite several good drives. The starting quarterback was clearly struggling, his passes sailing high and wide as he favored his injured shoulder. By halftime, they were down 14-3, and the mood in the locker room was tense. Coach Patterson's halftime speech was brief and to the point. "We've got 30 minutes to save our season. Someone needs to step up and make plays." As he said it, his eyes found Eli's across the crowded room. The third quarter was a nightmare. The starting quarterback threw 2 interceptions. The second one returned for a touchdown that put Alabama down 21-3. The crowd was restless. The announcers were questioning the team's preparation, and Eli could see the hope draining from his teammates' faces. That's when he felt the familiar tap on his shoulder. "Barnes," Coach Martinez said, his voice calm despite the chaos around them, "it's time." Eli nodded, pulled on his helmet, and jogged toward the field. The public address announcer's voice boomed across the stadium. Now, at quarterback for Alabama. Number 14, Eli Barnes. The crowd didn't know who he was, but they were about to find out. The first drive was crucial. Eli needed to show his teammates that he belonged, that the kid from Millerville could compete on the biggest stage in college football. The huddle was different now. These weren't practice players anymore, but battle-tested warriors who'd been through everything together. "Listen up," said the center, his voice commanding despite the crowd noise. "We know you can do this. We've seen you in practice. Now let's go show everyone else." Eli felt a calm settle over him, the same feeling he'd had in his backyard all those years ago. The game slowed down, the noise faded, and he could see the field with perfect clarity. The director was a masterpiece of execution and timing. Eli started with short passes, building rhythm and confidence, then gradually pushed the ball downfield. On 3rd and long, he rolled out of the pocket and found his tight end for a 20-yard gain. 2 plays later, he hit his slot receiver on a perfectly placed fade route for Alabama's first touchdown of the half. The stadium erupted, and as Eli jogged to the sideline, he saw something he'd never seen before: his teammates mobbing him, celebrating not just the touchdown, but the emergence of their unlikely hero. The score was 21-10, and suddenly, the impossible seemed possible. The fourth quarter was a blur of motion and emotion. Alabama scored twice more, both on passes from Eli, and with 2 minutes left. They had pulled to within 3 points at 24-21. The defense forced a punt, and Alabama took over at their own 25-yard line with 1:47 remaining. This was it, the moment that would define not just the game, but Eli's entire life. As he jogged onto the field, he could hear the crowd noise building to a crescendo. But underneath it all, he heard something else: the voice of his daddy, teaching him to throw behind that old trailer. "Keep your feet set, son. Trust your arm. The ball knows where it wants to go." The drive was a thing of beauty. Eli completed passes to 4 different receivers, each one perfectly placed, each one moving Alabama closer to the end zone. With 37 seconds left, they faced 4th down and 6 from the opponent's 28-yard line. Coach Patterson called timeout, and the entire team huddled around Eli. "This is why you're here," the coach said, his voice barely audible over the crowd. "This is what you've been preparing for your whole life." Eli nodded, his heart pounding but his hands steady. He looked around at his teammates, kids from all over the country who'd become his brothers, and he knew exactly what he had to do. The play call was Millerville special, a route combination that Coach Martinez had installed specifically for Eli, named after his hometown. As he took the snap and dropped back, time seemed to slow to a crawl. The pocket collapsed around him, but he stepped up, keeping his eyes downfield. His receiver broke open across the middle, and Eli delivered a perfect strike. The ball spiraling through the California air with all the hopes and dreams of a small town in Alabama attached to it. The catch was made, the touchdown was scored, and Eli Barnes, the last pick, the walk-on, the kid nobody wanted, had just thrown the game-winning touchdown in the college football playoff semi-final. As his teammates mobbed him in the end zone, Eli looked up at the crowd and whispered, "Thank you, Daddy. Thank you, Mama. Thank you, Mil." The immediate aftermath of the game was a whirlwind of interviews, celebrations, and disbelief. As Eli stood on the field, confetti falling around him like snow, he couldn't quite process what had just happened. The same reporters who'd never known his name were now shoving microphones in his face, asking him to explain the miracle they'd just witnessed. "I just tried to do what my daddy taught me," he said, his voice hoarse from shouting audibles over the crowd noise. "Keep your feet set, trust your arm, and let the ball do the work." The simplicity of his answer, delivered in that unmistakable Alabama drawl, captured the hearts of everyone watching. This wasn't just a football story, it was an American story about perseverance, faith, and the power of never giving up on your dreams. The long-term impact of that game rippled outward, like stones thrown into still water. Eli became an overnight sensation, his story inspiring countless kids who'd been told they weren't good enough, weren't big enough, weren't fast enough. The NFL scouts who'd never heard of him were suddenly lining up to watch his every practice. And the Heisman Trophy voters who'd never considered him were now mentioning his name in serious conversations. But more importantly, his success had changed the culture of Alabama football. Proving that walk-ons could be difference makers, that character mattered as much as talent. And that sometimes the best players were the ones who wanted it most. Back in Millerville, the celebration lasted for weeks. The town-painted home of Eli Barnes on the water tower, and Mabel's Diner became a shrine to their local hero. With newspaper clippings and photographs covering every inch of wall space. His parents were local celebrities now, unable to go anywhere without someone wanting to talk about their son. "We always knew he was special," his mama would say, tears in her eyes. "But we never imagined this." The high school retired his jersey, hanging it in the gym next to the other legends. And Coach Thompson started telling recruits about the kid who'd practiced in his backyard until his arm was sore, who'd studied film until his eyes burned, who'd never stopped believing in himself even when nobody else would. The life lessons Eli learned during his journey extended far beyond football. He'd discovered that success wasn't just about talent or opportunity. It was about preparation, meeting possibility. About being ready when your moment came. He'd learned that the opinions of others, whether positive or negative, were just noise compared to the voice of your own heart. Most importantly, he'd learned that the American dream wasn't just about reaching the top, it was about the climb itself. About becoming the person you were meant to be in the process of pursuing your goals. These lessons would serve him well. In whatever came next, whether it was the NFL, coaching, or life beyond football. The transformation from forgotten walk-on to national hero had changed Eli in ways he was still discovering. The shy kid who'd once been intimidated by his teammates' confidence had become a leader. Someone others looked to in moments of pressure. The small-town boy who'd felt out of place in the big city had learned that his roots were actually his strength, that the values instilled in him by his family and community were more valuable than any coaching or training. He'd grown into the person his daddy had always believed he could be, the one his mama had prayed for during those long nights. At the diner, the one Coach Martinez had seen potential in when nobody else would give him a chance. The impact of Eli's story extended beyond just one person or one team. It reminded everyone who heard it that in America, the underdog can still win. That hard work and determination can still triumph over privilege and pedigree. It showed that the last pick in the draft could become the first name on everyone's lips. That the kid from the small town could shine on the biggest stage. Most importantly, it proved that dreams don't have expiration dates. That it's never too late to become the person you've always wanted to be. And that sometimes the most unlikely heroes are the ones who change the world. As Eli stood on that field in Pasadena, looking up at the lights and the crowd and the scoreboard that showed his team had won, he thought about all the people who'd helped him get there. His daddy, who'd taught him to throw with patience and love. His mama, who'd sacrificed so much to give him opportunities. Coach Martinez, who'd believed in him when nobody else would. The teammates who'd accepted him and fought alongside him. The town of Millerville, who'd never stopped cheering for their own. And in that moment, Eli Barnes understood that he'd never really been the last pick at all. He'd been exactly where he was supposed to be. Exactly when he was supposed to be there, ready to prove that in America. If you work hard enough and believe long enough, any dream is possible.